Welcome everybody at now panel 2 of the international colloquium called Creativity and a Cybernetic Concept of Culture. And for those of you who were here yesterday, I might be repeating myself, but I'll just say a few words about what we came here to discuss. So as an introduction, more than 70 years after Norbert Wiener's original framing of the term cybernetics, the overlap between living systems and technology has become ubiquitous. Issues of technological saturation, infrastructural and ecological resilience, and universality have become fundamental for thinking technology from the 1990s onwards. In what ways have cybernetics kept their original meaning of steering capital towards a presumed endpoint, and how can such a sense of looming universality be rethought, resituated, and repurposed? What is the potential for a cosmotechnical shift from Western techniques, and where to find space for what Yukhui has termed techno-diversity within a nomadic space of solidarity? So for those of you who were here yesterday, we approached very similar topics with 3 of our guests who are sitting right here on the couch. And I will say a few words, starting with Lenka Veselá, who is a PhD researcher at the Department of Theory and History of Art at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Brno, focusing on synthetic bodies and synthetic bodies of knowledges. Next to her, we have Noemi Purkrábková, who is a media theorist, art writer, curator, DJ, and co-founder of the amorphous audiovisual collective BCAA System. She is also editor of Art and Antiques magazine and a contributor to a number of others, and a PhD candidate. And next to her, we have Lukáš Prokop, who is currently studying a master's program at the FFA Technical University in Brno at the video studio. I would also like to welcome 2 of our new guests for panel number 2. Next to Lukáš, we have Louis Armand, who is a Prague writer, theorist, and visual artist. And he has written numerous novels, including Vampire, Glass House, The Combinations. And he is formerly an editor of Lock magazine and directs the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory at Charles University in Prague. And next to me, we have Václav Janoščík, who is a pedagogue, theorist, and curator currently teaching at the Academy of Fine Arts and Academy of Arts, Architecture and Design in Prague. He has edited several volumes on problems of contemporary thinking, ranging from new materialism, speculative realism, acceleration of future, and media theory, including Object, Reinventing Horizons, Mind in Terrain, and Back to the Future, as well as writing numerous personal books, including Straining the Contemporary, that's 2020, and Dystopian Realism, that's 2022. He tries to, in his work, he tries to reinterpret and weaponize pop culture. So without further ado, we're going to be speaking for about the next 40 minutes. Anytime you might have questions, please just raise your hand and we'll accommodate you, and it'd be great to get some feedback and listen to what you have to say about some of the things we will be talking about. And I'd like to come back, in a way, to yesterday's panel, where we talked, apart from other things, we talked about this notion of technology and world building. So in what way does technology help us speculate a future, a world? And I'd like to ask Lukáš Prokop, because he said one thing yesterday about his personal art practice, and it's that he bootstraps worlds into existence. And I'm just kind of wondering, Lukáš, what did you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so like bootstrapping, like some sort of bottom-up approach, like in relation to world. When you talk about bootstrapping, like I felt there was some sort of like a dogma in it, in the sense that like this cybernetic, construction of like synthetic life, or just creating like complexity from little amounts of data. So I thought it was like very like instrumentalized, or something in this sense. So that's why I tried to approach it from the perspective of, or via like intuition, by like non-rational thinking, and without much like learned logic. I thought there was like because it's this like this like non-rationality which I tried to introduce into it was like was the way for me to just to create something that's not like really aimed at a specific goal or like reading teleology, something like that, and I guess that's my
Absolutely. Thanks for the answer. It seems that you're approaching it from a very kind of practical approach or perspective. And I'd like to ask Václav next to me, because his work deals a lot with the possibility of other worlds. He critiques extensively this notion of capitalist realism as we see it, for example, in Mark Fisher. And it has a lot to do with speculation and speculating in a way theoretically world building. And I'm just kind of wondering whether you might provide us, Václav, with sort of where Lukáš is coming at it from a very practical sort of artist perspective, whether you could maybe provide your own thoughts on the question of world building.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and inviting me anyway. These are really broad questions, and I feel this kind of being doomed as a theorist and being, forced to actually talk the discourse and not the practice, which of course is like interesting. And in a way, I actually deal with that. Quite recently, I really started to work in Unreal and actually work on some sort of world building in this very easily accessible engine and platform. So, in my view, again, this precarious relationship between theory and practice is actually what is at stake here, or what is at stake today. Since I guess there's what really makes difference today is actually the accessibility of such utensils and instruments and platforms. So, but still, you ask me about the, theoretical, maybe historical predispositions. And since you already charged the introduction with so many claims, and we could really have a long discussion about each of them. But still, what I kind of came up with this weekend when I was trying to revive my cybernetic whatever introductions. It is precarious as well to actually develop some sort of theory of technology. We saw it in case of not only cybernetics but also the systems theory, the network theory, acceleration. Each of these discourses on theory in some way or another waned away, and they did not really keep up with the development of technology. And as you already pointed out, the technodiversity by Hugh Hui and let's say Bernard Stiegler, these are the concepts that are now on the table insofar as, for instance, philosophy goes. So I don't know if this is introduction you imagined.
Absolutely. Could you maybe just speculate on what you understand by technodiversity?
Oh. So, I really want to omit any more name dropping or this kind of sober academic definitions, but still it really is a concept coming from Hugh Hui, who wants to simply, in first instance, he wants to just fight the monotechnological reason, or the mondialization, something we call globalization minus, something that somehow strips away the other options, how to appropriate technology. So in his case, it is of course kind of sinocentric, which is actually the main problem I have with the theory. But still, it is maybe one of the really last pretendants. I mean, really Bernard Stiegler and Hugh Hui, of these big theorists that really want to not only revive this idea of the theory of everything concerned really with technology and cybernetics, but they also push for some sort of really up-to-date actual discourse. So again, to maybe answer you more directly, we all have to develop some sort of attitude towards technology, and that's what I already talked about in terms of like really not only talking but doing things and using the options we have.
I would like to. Does it work? Okay, I can talk loud. Okay, so I have a follow-up question. If you're talking capitalist realism and like actual capitalist realism, I have a question related to the emergence of metaverse as a sort of evil incarnation of world building that sort of crushes any diversity and divergence. Do you think there's a critical and perhaps maybe even political potential in this, alternative techno storytelling and world building? Is it a possibility to oppose, such?
Okay, if it's a question for me, that's a difficult one again. Of course, the problem that we face in terms of technology is, of course, that now it's appropriated by the corporate capital. That's the bottom line. That's the first order problem we need to deal with. And of course, there is a tradition of, I don't know, hacking and hackership, and there's tradition of open software, or within their own respective fields, very, very actually good and prolific. On the other hand, we really don't have an alternative how to actually develop new technology based on, let's say, social interest instead of financial interest. But where I would really see whatever the option or the avenue is really to use precisely things like Ableton, or Ableton is actually paid, but Unreal and let's say Blender are better in terms of capitalization. But it may seem like a banal thing, but these are instruments. So as, I don't know, Microsoft Word was like 20, maybe even more years ago, or Photoshop. So I guess, I hope these will develop something new. And maybe to say something more substantial, if corporate capitalism is actually the number one problem concerning technology today, maybe the second problem is actually the identity politics. Since what we somehow face in our everyday lives is actually this, piling pressure to actually brand ourselves, to develop some sort of personal marketing, to become micro celebrities of some sort, and to kind of jump in the ladder. But again, here we have technology to develop different platforms on which we can generate cultural or financial capital in a different way, other than, let's say, the mainstream culture.
Yeah. Can I maybe just react to first? Thank you, Václav, for. I know it might sound like very obvious, but thank you for mentioning neoliberal capitalism as being the number one problem. I just recalled, because of this, I was rereading Tikkun's cybernetic hypothesis as well, and there's the fact that we paid for a lot of decades, actually a lot of interest in technology and in problems concerning technology, but whenever we speak about technodiversity, we just need to speak about capitalism first, I think, and that's something that I'm pretty skeptical about, also in the concept itself a little. And maybe just another quick point about the world building and potentially the metaverse. It's I have a feeling that, for example, metaverse is a really good example. We talked yesterday a little bit about this continuous tension between universalization and diversification in technologies. And for example, and it connects to what I already said, while we still have this economic system that we have, we can't possibly really get out of it, because it's this reterializing process. For example, there's been a lot of talks about the Web3 as some sort of a different non-platform organized way of interacting with each other again on like a better level, like, I don't know, redistribute finance better. But then like the metaverse is sort of Meta's way to colonize this again, like the Web 3.0. And in the end, like I don't want to say that it's gonna happen, but I already can see like there's still a lot of people hopeful about Web 3, but I kind of have a feeling that that's just how it's gonna end again, and it's just gonna get like devoured. So I don't know.
Would Louis like to react?
Where to begin? Okay, so, you know, I'm skeptical about Banner Stiegler being some kind of apostle of contemporary technology, even in a posthumous condition. You know, when he had the opportunity to engage with Derrida, the title of that engagement was Télévision. So, appropriation, expropriation, I think that sometimes the discourse of institutionalization overreaches itself. How do you say? It's like the old sort of critique of Plato that if truth could be arrived at, philosophy would have extinguished itself thousands of years ago. So if institutionalization is inevitable in this sort of monolithic sense, irrespective of the kind of, you know, pursuits of power of people like Microsoft and company, it would have totalized. I mean, totalization is an interesting phenomenon because it is indeed ongoing. It constantly manifests, it constantly mutates, just as the notion of capitalism is constantly transformed. You know, people often talk about it as if we're still in the 9th century or in the late 18th century, and clearly not. And, you know, this has been a truism of some of the post-Deleuze-Guattarian sort of commentary, right? That it's exactly that body of work that runs from Foucault through D&G that points out, and then through Baudrillard and company, and interestingly not Derrida, that really lays a kind of groundwork for thinking precisely the possibility of neoliberalism, and exactly those dynamics of lines of flight and desiring machines and so on so effectively articulate. And there's that joke, right, that people involved in sort of corporate emergent neoliberalism were basically handed something like 1,000 plateaus, as the way that some people are handed the art of war as a way of, you know, grasping what it is they're doing, how the commodity is now, or a way of thinking the commodity is evolved in such a way that it really is a signifier for possibility, you know, in a way that it wasn't before. It was attached to as kind of a fixed concept, just as words like technology had been attached to fixed concepts like artifacts. Whereas I think that the important sort of lesson of Derrida is that we have to grasp that technology is a notion that extends vastly beyond the idea of technical artifacts. And that's where cybernetics is so interesting, because, you know, when you're talking about world building in this counter-rationalist sense, you look at all the topics that were being discussed at the Macy conferences, and it's everything from humor, paradox, basic notions of communication, and so on, which is possible not despite the fact that people constantly break the rules of language, but in a sense because people break the rules of language, because there is that kind of disjunctive sort of nature of things. And this in itself is a techne, this is a technicity at work. And that seems to be really interesting as a way of thinking world building on the basis of something that is ultimately, you know, founded in things like humor, paradox, indeterminacy, and so on, as opposed to some of those sort of recuperative notions that end up sort of reducing it to a caricature of itself in order to pursue some pretty two-dimensional sort of profit-driven agenda, and calling that totalization. I think that's a pretty thin notion of totalization, actually. If we're persuaded that that means expropriation, then I think we've been conned, as in sort of the Plato's cave. We're told this is a hoax, it's an inevitability, we're powerless, we can't blah, blah, blah. If we buy into it, we buy the shares in Meta, then we go for the whole ride. I don't know.
Are there any reactions from the audience, provocations, questions at this moment? Yes, please. We don't have a mic for you, but please yell out.
Hi, thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question that I guess you can react to. And the question is, what would you say of video games? And I appreciate you mentioning Unreal Engine and Blender
Well, I don't know if there's more to say than just take it and use it and run away with it. And on the other hand, we really have to admit again that video games or gaming is just another business. It's actually the biggest cultural business we have at the moment, with crazy monopolies like Steam, Epic, Tencent, or Microsoft actually for the moment from today's or this year's acquisitions. So. Again, while I don't know, 5 years ago, video games industry was still kind of very eager, oversaturated with, let's say, idealist developers. Now it's really all about cutting the share out of the Steam marketplace. So that's the bad thing about that. But I guess we have to find new means how to even reinvent gaming. And of course, gaming is really not just about playing your PlayStation or PC, but we're as humans really kind of function along the way of gaming the system or games within language, etc. But anyway, what I would like to maybe say in advance to your question is not only it is about progressive content. We don't need more games with whatever minoritarian identities and subjectivities. There's already actually, I think, plenty of them in a way. But what we need is progressive forms, progressive distribution, the incentives to actually make those games, make, for instance, minoritarian and these different weird games, queer games, more popular.
Are there any other questions from the audience? No? Okay. I'd like to ask maybe about the alternatives in a way, because we talked a bit about totalization and this sort of drive towards totalizations via technology, reterritorialization, and so on. I would like to ask Lenka, yesterday you mentioned something about digital kinship. And I find that it sort of resonates with the overarching theme of this colloquium and this festival, in fact, which is solidarity. So I'm wondering maybe about in what way you meant digital kinship as sort of allowing for solidarity, and in a way, how do you regard it as a force which might mitigate these, and I really liked the phrasing you used, this crashing of divergence, this reterritorialization, let's say, of liveness of flight or whatever. So how does digital kinship to you, how does it, to what degree can we say it can be solidary?
Okay, thank you for the question. I mean, I turned it around because it was actually my question, what might the digital kinship be? And I was specifically referring to the chemical kinship as sort of making good relations with a bad kin. So if we can agree that, digital is sometimes also a bad kin, how to, make those relations. Also, I really like that Noemi brought attention and used the term of colonization that we also use in relation to chemicals. And I think it's very fitting for describing, the digital lands as well as being colonized. So, how to reclaim that land. But I don't have an answer for that. And also in terms of, all these alternatives, I think it's also a question of scale. I definitely think there's a critical potential and that, producing alternative content and knowledge is meaningful and of value, to the groups who actually produce them and their own audiences, but they are, really very small groups and typically at the margins. But I'm very skeptical about an actual political potential in the sense of political, not as, personal is political, but political as actual political action and structural changes. So, I'm afraid that we are left, with these building smaller and plural words at the margins rather than, having a sort of an actual possibility of changing, the whole thing.
I think this sort of brings up a really interesting question, and I'd like to pose it generally to all our panelists. I think what this notion of digital kinship, the way Lenka sort of described it, has to do with caretaking in a way, because we're talking about the use of tools structurally for, let's say, beneficial ends, non-toxic means of exchange and communication. And obviously care is a huge part of that. And so it's a general question to anybody who would like to take it, is in what way might we be able to envision technology and even digitality, if we're talking about digital kinship, as an exercise, as an attempt at caretaking.
I just bide time while these guys come up with an answer. I think you mentioned Mark Fisher before in Capitalist Realism, which is basically, to really compress, I suppose, a reflection on the notion of structure and how structure operates. And once you're within a certain kind of structure, there's a logic capture, or at least a sense that there's a logic capture. Maybe, again, there's a necessity of finding those elements within structures that, of course, are counter-logical, that offer means of a critique and so on. But, I'm kind of interested in this notion of the political, where, yesterday, Noemi sort of brought up that binary, the subject and the algorithm. And, Lacan's lesson is that the subject is algorithmic. That's where the subject comes from. But the notion of political subject, there's a tendency to fall back, I think, in a lot of discussions with political action, onto necessarily a kind of an individual responsibility and a collective responsibility, but still a humanistic notion of what the political is. Whereas we have a situation where, with automated trading and blah, 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 we have AIs and quasi-AIs operating in the world all around us. They perform functions that are somewhat like a caretaker function. They have a caretaker function with regards to investments for large corporations and so on, and their actions have far-reaching consequences. So what happens when we start to extend to these functions a political function as well? How, despite or because of the tasks they've been given as caretakers of the interests of capital and various other things, they exercise political functions that we need to be aware of and not separate necessarily from what we think of as the sphere of individual, collective, human political action or activism. That would be my...
Yeah. I was trying to do the thinking meanwhile when you were talking. But I just wanted to make a point maybe about, I think the same as the word world building, the same, the word care. I just was feeling there's been sort of an inflation of these words, for example, in the art world. And it's just so hard to remain, really thoughtful of what they actually still contain. For example, with world building, there was this Julia Stossek collection in Dresden just made this huge exhibition which was called World Building, and there was numerous artworks, a lot of them working with also gaming principles and so on. And of course, I wasn't there personally, but it's I've heard that a lot of it is just it can become an inflation of multitudes of the topic of care was present in some of the artworks as well, and then it's sort of everywhere. So I don't know, I'm usually very, and it sounds depressing, but I tend to be really oversaturated with these. But I had one more thought to the idea of care, which that you were negatively referring to Bernard Stiegler, but I would maybe just, I was recently reading a text from him that I think he must have written shortly before he died, and he was then again, but it's present in more of his text, of course, that he is when he's talking about how we need to be critically thinking about technologies, he's using this and in French it's nice to express that you have the word I don't know, like in English it's like carefully thinking, or like thinking with care, which means like in French it's like penser et penser, with like E and A in the second case. So I don't know, that's maybe just something to like, just like, I don't know, like maybe a term that is important to keep in mind while thinking about technologies as well. But I don't know, as I said, I think you need to be very careful even hearing these words in the public discourse, because I don't know, they just can, it connects to what I was already saying as well. Like, I don't know, they can become colonized themselves and emptied out. Sorry, that was depressing.
Okay, so following from the gloom and doom, because as I mentioned in my presentation yesterday, like my thinking is grounded in a new materialism and a posthumanism and material feminisms, which is a discourse that is precisely like full of sort of caring and hope, world building, storytelling. But I do feel, especially since working around this like chemical violence, that there's perhaps a vocabulary lacking there, how to account for negativity without, being too pessimistic, like being still hopeful, and how this can be addressed in thinking about the kin, and especially the bad kin, in the sense that, like a family, where your family member, might be not, perfect, but you're still sort of sharing house, and need to have like these rules and relations, put in place so that you can live together. So it's maybe more not just thinking about the caring formations that also involve technologies as something that is, just always nice and beautiful, but something that can also have conflict within. And also sometimes, yes, it's perhaps better to leave the house.
I think this notion of kin is well illustrated by what's going on. As you expropriate a people and then bomb the hell out of them after you've basically called them your kin. So this again is these humanistic sense of solidarity. Maybe kinship, size of solidarity, use a more political sense. It's always interesting to me how whenever the word technology pops up, suddenly there's this human solidarity, and people use this pronoun we that is in completely fictional function with regards to how people exercise care towards one another. And again, as if care is some uniquely human characteristic, which is, to take a little tangent, reminds me very much of the Voigt-Kampf test in Blade Runner, right? Where you basically have a kind of a Turing test orientated towards an artificial intelligence or a robot, an android, to see whether it's an android or a human based on affect. And this misconception of affect is something that isn't technological, and also as if affect in any way defines humans. I mean, I think we all have affect issues. So it's one of those deep ironies about, again, this way that we try to draw a line between ourselves, the we, and technology, and so on. I think this is really interesting. That's probably also one of the things with Stiegler. I sense he kind of works through a sort of an optimism that we can act because he perpetuates a kind of humanism into the post-human. That's my short take on that.
Any questions or comments or provocations or prompts from the audience? Not at this moment. Okay, we're slowly going to be wrapping up, and in a way, it'd be nice to return, from the other direction to our first question posed to Lukáš. Because I'd like to ask, we've been talking about, and there was a question from the audience about gaming, the position of gaming currently, and you as a creator of virtual worlds, of metaverses of their own. I'm wondering, how does this notion of care come into the equation for you? Where does caretaking come into your art which is based around, bootstrapping worlds into existence?
I've got to formulate. No, I think like if we take the presentation that and the projects that I presented yesterday, I think it's in the approach, really in the way not to succumb to this. To the flow of the software, really. It's like it nudges you in these like just imperceptible ways sometimes into I don't know, some sort of if a hyper-realistic visuality or some sort of different even just different way of working with the geometry and way of pretty much way of the creation of the geometry. So I think the care for the artwork in this regard that's just what I practice, but that's probably more care towards the world or like the artwork. Rather than to the technology or to the tools themselves, that's just that's a question that I don't really have an answer for. Because care is not. I'm not really sure how to or what the software would really need or how I would connect to something to like a piece of code that's written as a tool and that's maybe something to discuss.
Absolutely. Are there any comments or questions at this time? I might have a last one if nobody else wants to. And it's an open question to kind of everybody, and I would like to continue on this notion of the way algorithms are currently these shepherds or these caretaking tools, and I'm wondering to what degree we can sort of, to use Wilhelm Flusser's notion, is to work against the apparatus, because what Lukáš is saying is that I guess he doesn't take the cues of the software and he tries to work around them and work with them, and within this kind of general media environment of gamification of ubiquitous access in a way to various handheld apps at any point in the day or night. I'm wondering again, maybe how does care come into this, and perhaps this narcissist specter of self-care, which obviously is kind of problematic. I think Noemi sort of alluded to that. The way care is can often be in a way derailed towards perhaps even pathological ends. And I'm wondering, within this context, this media environment of algorithmic personalized care, how to work against the apparatus, perhaps, if that makes any sense. Are there alternatives to being like doom scrolling at 2 a.m.? Is it a question of exit, perhaps, as Lenka has alluded, that you can always leave the house if you don't, want to live with the...
I mean, can you? I'm not so sure.
Does anybody have an answer? Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. We've all got things to think about, and I'd like to very, very much again thank all our guests. I'd like to very much thank Vojta, who has been doing a wonderful job with the sound and with the visuals. Also, Object Paradise, who have been with us these 3 days for a tour de force indeed. Once again. Our guests were Louis Armand, Lukáš Prokop, Noemi Purkrábková, Lenka Veselá, and Václav Janoščík. Thank you very much. Next up, Anabatic Winds.